What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Uncensored Critic podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome along one of the best directors in the British theatre scene at the moment, and that is Mr. Justin Martin, a man with incredible amount of credits to his name. So I'll just read out a few of the amazing work that this man's done. For film, he has directed on The Beautiful Game with Thea Sharrock. In development is something called The Jungle, for which he will be the prime director. And Together, that was nominated for the Best Single Drama at the BAFTAs, and that cast included James McAvoy and Sharon Horgan. For TV, he has worked on The Crown, Series 1 and 2, The Lovers with Sky Atlantic. And for theatre, this is just a small sample of the work he's done for the theatre. He's worked on Billy Elliot, The Audience with Helen Mirren, Skylight with Kerry Mulligan and Bill Nighy, The Delivery, The Inheritance, The Jungle, and of course Prima Facie, which was directed at the Harold Pinter Theatre and the Golden Theatre, John Golden Theatre, sorry, in New York. And it's a genuine pleasure to have you along today, sir. Justin, how are you?
Very good. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you.
And you, man. Thank you. I've been a huge admirer of your work for ages. I saw Skylight just before Christmas, the theatre broadcast. What an amazing show to be a part of. What was that experience like for you?
Feels like such a long time ago now. It was good. It was great. It was a boxing match of two different acting styles,
Mm.
and both Kerry and Bill are at the top of their game still, but were brilliant and amazing and the most lovely people to work with. And yeah, it's just one of those beautiful plays. It hasn't been done. It hasn't been done since. So it'd be interesting to see if someone will take it on board again and do it.
Mm. It's definitely one from the bucket list for me. Obviously, few more years down the line, but as an actor, I'd love to tackle that role. And it's an amazing thing that Bill Nighy does. A lot of inspiration taken from him. So let's shoot right back to the beginning, Justin. So, start a question for you. Where did it all come from? The love of directing.
When I was a kid, I said I like to make things, and I said to my mum, what is a person who makes things? And she said, I think that's an engineer. And so I got into studying it. I was going to study engineering, but I'd always done theatre. And at the last minute, someone came up to me just for it to make our choices. I'm Australian, so in our HSC choices about where we go for university. And I said, oh, I want to do theatre, but there's no work in it. And they said, well, why not? Why not do theatre? And they kept asking me this question over and over. And eventually it came down to I picked the wrong course to do. So I shifted into theatre, and I've sort of done it ever since.
Amazing. And you've got quite a string of like different roles. People think like they see the director, but you've worked as not only just the main guy, but assistant director, co-director, and second unit director across the whole industry. What are the key differences between each role, or are they kind of the same?
No, they're very different. And look, everybody has a different way of delineating them, but the way that I always delineated them in terms of theatre stuff, an assistant director is sort of like it's a role about learning, where the emphasis is about shadowing and learning,
Mm.
and being involved in the creation of the production, but it's mainly based on learning. And then resident director is more about staying on to look after a show, and then associate director is building the show with the director, and inherently built to all the ideas that are put together and the design and all that sort of stuff. And then obviously director, and then second unit, and those sort of that's a completely different language. That's more in the telly film world, where they don't have a language for an associate, a resident, or an assistant director. So an assistant director in telly is very different to an assistant director in theatre, and then second unit director or additional unit are really about being alongside the director and shooting other things that are in the film. So they're different languages, theatre and telly, or screen and telly, screen and theatre, that have their own ways of sort of articulating what people do.
Yeah. Tell me about your experience on The Crown, because that's just exploded as a series. It's become one of the most famous series, I think, in the world, and of course, all of Netflix. What was that experience like?
It was bonkers. So Stephen Daldry and I did The Audience together, and with Peter Morgan, and that was the basis for The Crown. So we were always joking during the first lot of rehearsals with Helen that we should be doing this as a film or as a series. And then I remember the two of them going over to they were pitching to a number of different companies at that stage, and Stephen ringing me and saying, what are you doing for the next 2 years? Because we're going to be busy. And it was an amazing experience. I mean, I only worked on the first two series. Stephen and I work in a very I don't really know how we work together, to be honest. We just find our way through, and we have different skills and different interests, and one picks up a ball and runs with it, or the next one runs with it when they run out of ideas. So it's a very collegiate, collaborative process for us. So it was a really nice time, a great cast, an amazing crew of people, and the writing I thought was amazing. So it was a really good 2 years cutting one's teeth in the television industry.
Yeah, I love that. He calls you up and says, Justin, what are you doing for the next 2 years? Well, I could be doing. No, no, you're not. No, we're going to be very busy. A lot of those credits, actually, which I read out, goes back to your working relationship with Stephen Daldry. The Billy Elliot, the audience, Skylight, etc. What's it like working with him? What's he like as a director?
Well, Stephen's always worked. I mean, he ran theatres for quite a period of time, and Stephen's always worked with other directors and enjoys working with other directors. And so, I suppose, I mean, some directors can get very competitive with each other. I'm not like that, and part of that has come out of, and also been the reason that Stephen and I work together. But it's very, very collegiate. The brilliant thing in a rehearsal room is you when you're on your own, you've got to have all the ideas, you've got to have all the responses. When you work with someone else, you can go down a sort of a hole of an idea and see how far it goes. And if you run out of energy, then the other person can pick it up. And so it's a very, passing the baton is a really interesting way, because directing can be quite lonely. But with Stephen, in my experience with working with Stephen, which has been both my apprenticeship and also sort of, I don't know, a huge part of my working life, it's been a joy. It's really good fun.
Yeah, fantastic. How can it get lonely, being a director?
Well, I suppose creatively the buck stops with you, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of people looking at you going, what are we doing and how are we doing this? And you've got to make a lot of decisions, sometimes quite rapidly and sometimes over time. And so sometimes it does feel like you're a little bit of you're a bit of an island with an amazing team around you. But when there's two of you, there's a way of sharing that role, and being able to talk to someone and go, I actually don't know what to do in this scene. What do I do? Or have you got any ideas for this? And that I really enjoy it. I really enjoy working with the other creatives in general, but working with another director or other directors, I've always found good fun.
Yeah, because funny enough, I think on Graham Norton this past week they had Bryan Cranston, Bradley Cooper on talking about their directing experiences, and Bryan said that he didn't realize till the first day just how like the whole crew, everyone's looking at you going, so what do we do? What's going to happen? And you're going, okay, what's going on here? Like that initial first day, like how do you get over that initial first day with all these eyes just looking at you going, Justin, where do you want me to go? What do we do?
I don't know. It's just for me, it's always been about being honest about what I know and what I don't know. And actually, the more that you say you don't know, the more people assume you do, which I always think is really. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you try and surround yourself with a really good team who all have different skills and different points of view, and then trying to empower them. I mean, Stephen's always taught me, there's two big things Stephen always taught me. The first one was that money will follow the idea. And the second is that idea of a relentless pursuit towards the best idea in the room. And it doesn't have to be yours. Our main job as directors is to identify what the best idea in the room is. And I think when you've got more creatives around you, it just makes it easier because there's more ideas to choose from.
And I think that's interesting because I've spoken to writers and choreographers before, and there's always like a sense of what they call writer's block or creative block, if that makes sense. And is there such a thing as director's block? But I suppose it's easily solvable because you've got all these people around you, and everyone to sort of help clean up the mess or something, or unblock you. Is there such a thing as director's block?
Yeah, I suppose there is. I mean, I've never talked about it in those terms, but we all have moments where we can't solve something, and we do our best. And sometimes it can be someone else's idea that unblocks that. Or sometimes, you'll get to a production and you'll watch and you'll go, I never quite solved that section, or I'm stuck there. But ultimately, for me, a huge part of my job is craft, not necessarily the art. So it's about putting great people with different artistic skills together and trying to make clear what they're all trying to say. So yeah, I never thought about it in those terms, but I will now.
Good. That's an exclusive. You heard it here first. We were talking to before we came on about because you're currently involved with Stranger Things in the West End at the moment, and you're talking about how things are chopping and changing, and even when you're in the run and you're in, you've done all the rehearsals, the previews, and you're in it now. Yet as a director, you said you're always looking to still refine things, always to change things. And when I was a kid, I used to go to the theatre and think, oh, like that's the polished version. They don't need to change anything from the moment they go on stage on the first night. It's all just the same. But that, I suppose, couldn't be further from the truth. It's like, so even when you've got it up on its feet and everything's polished and the audience are in, can you turn off, I mean, I suppose you can't really, but can you turn off that director element in your brain? What can we change? What can we improve?
Yeah, I can sometimes. I mean, when I'm in the mode of the room itself and just enjoying the show,
Yeah.
I turn it off. But I suppose it's always like an audience teaches you so much about what a play is or what a musical is, and why wouldn't you learn from them? So, it's interesting as I went back and saw the show recently. I hadn't seen it for about a month, and I went back, and you suddenly go, oh, there's a different energy to the audiences in a good way, because it's settled down into what it is, and now you can really look at it and go, okay, oh, we got that right. We can make that clearer. That's not quite clear, and it's just interesting. It's just interesting, and so it's always a process. I mean, that's what I think previews and Stephen, I got this from Stephen, I suppose, in a lot of ways, is previews are always a process to understand and discover what the play is, because the audience is such a huge part of it, and you've got to learn them. And The Jungle was such an example of that, because before we got the audience in, we had no idea what the play was, because the audience became such a central part, being in that sort of immersive world. So you keep learning. They keep teaching you about what the play's about and what's not clear to them, and when they shuffle, and when you get a good laugh and it's a really sort of middle of the stalls laugh, and when you get a sort of not good laugh. So yeah, I don't know. I'll always think about different ways to make things better, or if I did it again somewhere, can I redo something in some different way, or is there things I can do with the cast at the moment? But I think it's just ongoing.
Yeah, you mentioned The Jungle there, and of course that show went to started at the Young Vic, then went to the St. Anne's Warehouse in New York, and then went to San Francisco. And of course, that's not the first show that you've done, which has gone from the UK over to America. Which you had The Inheritance, and of course Prima Facie as well, which we'll get onto in a minute. It's funny enough, I spoke to someone. My last episode I did was someone in New York, and she talked about, one question I asked was like the differences between Broadway and UK audiences, how I think in America they can be a bit more vocal. But she was like, well, I think we're kind of the same. What did you notice between the UK and American audiences with those plays in particular, or indeed in general?
I think well, my experience certainly has been that New York audiences will speak what's on their mind sometimes in the middle of the show more than UK do. But that doesn't mean that it's enjoyed any more or any less.
Yeah.
But it is interesting what people understand. I remember when we were talking about Billy in New York, there was a lot of chat around the fact that Billy Elliot's dad, calls him a little twat or something. And in the UK, they find that hysterical. In the US, they found it very hard to relate to the father. They just thought he was an abusive father. And
Yeah.
and so, I mean, I'm very responsive to audiences. And so, if something's not reading in the way that I feel it is, I'll be very happy to change, to change and rework things. But again, it comes from the ideal of I'm learning about the show from an audience. But yeah, it is different. It is different. Not one's not better than the other. They're just a different thing. Americans really love emotion, and there's an intellect within I suppose it's where theatre comes from. In the case of England, someone said a long time ago, which I thought was really interesting, that English theatre is born out of journalism and theatre and education, and American theatre is born out of that whole, what was happening with the method and the bit, so it's about the person and the family. And I think ultimately you want both.
And I think that's you mentioned Billy Elliot there, and I think that's one of my favorite shows. And it's just like you mentioned there, the differences between the UK sort of culture and of Newcastle. We get it in County Durham and all that. We understand it's all kind of family this and how people do that. But the emotion that you got in that show was just unfathomable. I think the Mother song especially. I was lucky enough to see it more than once actually when it was in London at the Palace Theatre. That scene in particular just it just breaks you in half. The mother song, doesn't it? I mean, the reaction you must have got every night must have been pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, Billy is the show. I've seen Billy, I don't know, it must be 1,500 times now. And that song still gets me. I mean, it really does make you get in touch with your inner 13-year-old and that notion of loss and of joy and of what you wanted to be when you were younger. And it's a really special show. It always has been a beautiful and very special show.
Yeah, spectacular. Um, I'm always curious about your work, particularly on I've said it wrong again. Prima Facie, as I've said a few times on this, sort of the main sort of body of today. It was a show, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a show about Tessa, who's a young lawyer, dealing with sexual assault cases until something comes along and flips her world upside down, and that's all I'll say. But if any spoilers do come up, guys, just be warned. This might be the case. So tell me about Prima Facie. Where did you first hear about this job?
So Suzie Miller, who was the writer, came and saw The Jungle, and she just wanted to meet to talk about that play.
Hmm.
And she and I met and talked. Really, I suppose what we shared was a naive belief that theatre can change the world. And
That's true. It's true.
well, we hope so. I mean, Suzie had been a barrister for a long time and got frustrated by the fact that she felt that the legal system wasn't working in a way that was helpful often to the people that it was supposedly protecting. And so she became a playwright. And this play she'd been thinking about for 20 years, and she talks about it often, that she says, when I first wrote it, she thought no one would come and see it. And I remember she sent it to me, said, I've got this little play, would you mind reading it? And I read it. I read it sitting. I went on holidays and I was reading it on holidays, and I just burst into tears. And there was something about the profound injustice of it,
Yeah.
and the fact that it wasn't being talked about. I mean, I'm always fascinated with, I call them lost tribes, but like, the conversations that aren't happening that should be happening, that have both that are about something that's in conversation in the world, but also have a really personal story at the center of it.
Yeah.
And she had found a way of encapsulating her worldview about the justice system within a play and within a character. And we just decided to do it. And so she talked to James Bierman about producing it, and we had a conversation about that. And then we started talking about actors. And then I remember that the idea of Jodie Comer came up, and Suzie was like, we can't employ her, she's Russian. And I sent her a stack of clips from interviews with Jodie. And what was really important for me was that it was a working class. I'm Australian. I was born in a mining town north of Sydney, also called Newcastle, and brought up in Sydney. And I was aware that the working class roots and how she'd fought to where she had to get to was really important in terms of the story. And so when we met Jodie, she just felt like the right fit for her. And so her agent read it on a Wednesday, she read it on a Friday, and she'd sort of said, yeah, I want to meet on the Monday. So it was a very fast process, but I just knew the right actor would go, I want to do this, and I don't want to see anyone else do it.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Jodie, not just because of Killing Eve, but tickets for this thing went like gold dust. So sadly, I wasn't able to see it in the theatre, but I saw it via the broadcast, which I think has become the most successful, taken the most money than any other cinema event since NT Live sort of began, and that success, has led to a lot of. I remember speaking to Danny Arlington, who was Jodie's understudy on this show, and she talked about the amount of people that came backstage, they met in the by the stage door, who shared their stories as well, and that this play sort of helped a lot of people to share their own stories and eventually stop, sort of burying it and stuff. What was your experience of audiences' reactions to this thing?
I mean, overwhelming, and it felt like a huge responsibility. I mean, that very idea that 1 in 3, and giving words to the idea that someone can say I'm 1 in 3 was a really powerful thing. And I remember when we did The Inheritance, I remember that taking that to New York, there was a really emotional response where you feel like there was a whole lot of trauma and grief that had not been dealt with, and the play became a means within which to do that, to talk about the
Yeah.
AIDS epidemic. And I suppose to some extent, Prima Facie did the same, is that injustice, which women have been acutely aware of for a long time, there was suddenly an outlet to talk about it that was in the mainstream. And that felt like such a responsibility. And we got so many letters and we got so many emails, which just were overwhelming in their generosity of sharing their stories. And it was a really humbling thing, both as a theatre maker, but also as a man, going, this thing which makes me angry has been making a lot of people angry for a long time, and why isn't it changing? And I think that's why the play for me felt so important. And also being a male, I mean, we are a majority, the reason that the problem exists. Not, I mean, we'll all argue that it's not us specifically, but our people are. And I think we have to find a way to be part of the conversation so it gets better, because I don't want to live in a world in which half the population have different rights to me. I want to try and live in a world that's fairer than that, and also looks after us all, because I'm as much a product of my mother as I am of my father. The patriarchy has done huge damage to me as a human being, as it's done to everybody, different degrees. And I think we need to question it and talk about it, and to be a part of this play, which was trying to find a way to talk about it in a very particular world that affects all women, was deeply, deeply humbling, and felt like such a responsibility. But yeah, it was amazing, and the response in New York, as in London, was equally as effusive, and it really brought people together.
Yeah. I think that was one of my questions for you, like the differences between, we just mentioned the UK and the US audiences, kind of differentials, if any, if they are a little bit smaller. But it sounds like this show got both strong reactions, both from both sides of the pond. People just sharing their experiences. And am I right in thinking in New York, Doug Kerr, I think, who created the design of it, who's also been on the show, was it the Jodie's, the two faces of Jodie on the poster, was made up of lots of like people's headshots or pictures of people who sent it all in, who the show had had that impact, and they wanted to share and literally be a part of it on their big banner in New York. And I got to show like that. This show did so much, not only just like for you guys to show your incredible craft and everything, but the way you've helped so many people get through what is possibly like one of the hardest things that they could possibly talk about that's happened to them in their lives.
Yeah, I think a huge part of the community experience of theatre is to say you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Prima Facie did. I remember, I mean, when we did The Jungle, I remember at the end, there was a lot of people going, okay, so we've seen this thing. It's a huge problem. What do we do? And they wanted answers. And The Jungle really was a question. And Prima Facie is a question. And so what we needed to do is to try and find ways to give access to people different answers. It does, and not to say these are the only answers, but one of them was to sort of create that community that appeared in that picture, but also the Schools Consent Project, which was a huge part of, which is as a whole lot of these amazing young barristers who are going, we defend people in sexual assault cases, and we sometimes know that the system is helping them in an unfair way. How can we educate people about how the legal system relates to consent? And so we partnered with them for the show, both here and in New York, and they've launched in New York. And that just felt like a way of going, here's one way, let's educate everybody, including ourselves. Because, I was never taught when I was younger about the legal framework around consent and where we're all in danger. And so it was trying to find answers to questions that the play rose about, something's got to change, but how do we change it?
Yeah. And and I think it was a huge movement towards just finding that, like that word you used there, consent. It's a huge thing. And I think more of us need to be sort of a bit more aware of what we can and what we can't do. And we hear these stories of people that have been in those situations, and this play has helped to be like a locomotive for change in that respect. So theatre can change people's lives, what we were talking about, what we talked about earlier, or it can change the world, particularly in situations like this. I want to just cast your mind back to the very first day of rehearsals. Am I right in thinking you had just 3 weeks to rehearse this thing?
Prima Facie?
Yeah.
No, we had a little more than that.
Okay.
But yeah, back to the first day.
Yeah,
Uh,
so right back to the first day, like because all these credits, you've like Skylight was just three people. You've got Billy Elliot, which was a big ensemble of people, and but then suddenly you've just got one person to work with. It's a one woman show. What's it like just working with one person on this epic monologue?
it's a slight it's a slight misunderstanding to think it's one, because ultimately you've got this massive team around you. And I had just
Yeah,
got a lot of my mates together.
yeah,
So I had an amazing stage manager, Georgia Bird, who I'd worked with on a number of shows, and she was, in the room, and she had her team, and I had a design team that I'd worked with in Miriam, and so we were all there, and it really was a group effort to build. I mean, there's an intense conversation at the center of it between Jodie and I, which is about the play, and Suzie being a huge part of that conversation as well,
yeah,
because Suzie was with us for a lot of the rehearsals. But really, it felt like a massive team effort, and it does take a village to make a show, and a show like that. I mean, so many people were open in that room. Like, I mean, there were different people, whether it be ASMs or crew, coming forward and going, "This is what I think this is about," or I understand these lines in this way," and I tried to create a room in which everybody felt like they could talk, and we created a really mixed room. So we didn't want it to be just women or just men, or we wanted it to be mixed, so that the conversation could be vibrant in the room. But it was really exciting, and it was the best experience in a rehearsal room I've ever had, because it was a very,
mm,
very supportive and loving room, as it needs to be when you're asking someone to go to the depths of the trauma that particular character has to go through.
yeah. I mean, Jodie looked like she took to it like a duck to water. What's it like working with her?
She's a joy. She's a theater animal, and she comes across as fearless. Sorry, as fearless. She comes across as, but I think she's just really courageous. She does get scared, but her way of dealing with it is going, "Oh, okay, I've got to do that," and I admire her deeply. But the real thing, I mean, there was so much laughter in that room, and we just had a genuinely good time together as a group, and that was, I mean, I'm sure I haven't listened to Danny's interview on this, but I'm sure Danny said the same. It became a real family, and particularly there was a core group of women who were stage management, um, and with Jodie and Danny became a sort of total family together, and they stayed with the show and looked after it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think I remember. I think Danny talked about the real family and community you had backstage and everything. Like you mentioned, it wasn't just you and Jodie. Obviously, you had a whole team behind you. But I remember Jodie at the end of, because I only saw it via the broadcast, was when she took her bow, she did this and just beckoned like the side of everyone backstage, because even though, like you say, it was just a one woman show, but it was a team effort to sort of put this together, and so everyone was supporting her and just sending her good vibes and good energy every single night to make sure she was all right. I just want to ask you quickly. I spoke with Danny about, because Danny did one show in New York. Because Jodie, I think, was it a couple of minutes into a show and then couldn't carry on. Is that correct?
Yeah, there were crazy fires going on, and New York was like, I mean, if you've seen the pictures, it's
Yeah,
crazy, full
yeah,
of smog. And to go out there and to do, like, I mean, we built a very, very physical show. And part of the thing about a one-person show is it's sort of a circus show. So, because and the question we get asked the most is, how did she learn all those lines? Which of course is just that's the part of being an actor. That's what you
yeah,
have to do.
yeah.
But to go out there and to be as physical as she did, when you could barely see in front of you.
Oh
Um,
wow.
she and also she's doing 8 shows a week, so she was, it's an exhausting thing to do. And the amazing thing about Jodie is, because she hadn't done a lot of theatre before, she gives you 150%. Like, there's
Mm,
no, I'm going to have a quiet matinee. It's like you're getting everything every time she goes out there. And so that day, she got up there and the smoke, and she just got overwhelmed by it. And I mean, that's why we have understudies. And I remember her coming off, and she was so sort of upset about the fact that she'd let everybody down. And we just all spoke to her and went, "No, this is
mm,
this is what it is." And there's a lovely picture of her and Georgia and the team watching Danny do it and being really supportive of Danny. And it was a really joyful thing. And then Jodie went on that night, and did the show in the evening. It was just in the day where it got particularly bad. But she's such a trooper, and she was such a supporter of Danny, and Danny was such a supporter of her, and they held each other through that whole process. And, you know, it's a testament to the team that, you know, in that moment, they were able to rally and do the show. And, you know, it's interesting. I mean, some people will go, oh, you know, I came to see Jodie and I didn't see it. But for me, you know, Jodie's a huge part of that. But the show stands on its own, and Danny did the show, and the people who saw it loved it and thought she was brilliant, because she is.
Yeah, of course. Who is Tessa to you? Who is she?
I mean, Tessa is an ideologue who believes she's a she's a religious believer, and her religion is the law, and she's so passionate about it. She's all of us in some ways, because I think on some level we all believe that the law is built to protect us. And when you discover that the law is not there to protect you, or that it's deliberately built to favor some people over you,
Yeah.
it's both a tragic, but it makes you really angry. And so you know, I don't know. I mean, Tessa is everybody to me. Tessa is me, but she's also, you know, all the phenomenal women that I know and have worked with in my career. And yeah, I don't know. Anybody who believes in something and comes to really understand that it's, you know, it's some of it is a lie, I suppose. But I think she's so. I mean, what Suzie wrote in that character, which Jodie so brilliantly personified, was somebody that you could admire and look up to, and then yet had the sort of went through this amazing revelation in her life.
I think yeah, also you mentioned earlier, like about all the activities that Tessa has to do on stage. You know, I think there's times where she gets dressed and undressed, and then there's a big table, and then she has to be like in a dance routine or something when she's in the club and everything. Because I said this to Danny actually as well. I really liked the bit where she goes, the first day of law school, and she goes, "Oh, what's your name?" "Benedict." "Of course his name's Benedict." You know, I was like, yeah, that really. I was like, yeah, that sounds like a law school name. But what was it about? Because this kind of ties into another question, really, because with a one-person show, you know, you've literally got one person to keep an audience's attention for, you know, 80, 90 minutes. What was it about creating all these like stations, if you will, like all these things for her to do? Was that to sort of ground her, or was that to like sort of give the show like a bit more kind of energy, or like things to do, so she's not just standing and talking to the audience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think obviously we had Jodie agreed to do the show, and we'd started talking about theaters, and it had been done before in a very small production, and there's a very small production of that play which is brilliant. A friend of mine, Sheridan Harbinger, had done in Australia, and I went, obviously we need to be in a bigger theater because we want the most amount of people to see it possible, and so we needed to create a world in which there was some scale. Miriam, the designer, and I were trying to figure out what's the playground within which a barrister exists, and we spent a lot of time going to court and being at the Old Bailey and just watching court cases and going to chambers and experiencing that. And one of the things we came across really early, we knew that we wanted it to rain in the middle of the show, and that was a sort of important early design element around which other things were. And then the folders became something, because there were folders everywhere we went. So they were sort of the two things we started with. The sort of energy of moving the show around really was to go, okay, we need to give a sense of a world of all these different sets, but we wanted to keep her in control of them, so that she had agency to go, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to change it, rather than the set doing it for her. So that the first half really was a set in which she was in control of, and the second half was a set in which she wasn't in control of, where things could happen, like the rain, folders coming back in, and they were sort of the signpost that we used to kind of design the show. And so, I mean, I love the energy and the acrobatics of her moving around that space, and she's moving the tables, and she's controlling, and she's on them, and then she's off them, and it felt like it gave it real energy. But in truth, when you watch the show, she is down stage center for 85% of the show. So it's the illusion of scale more than it is the reality, and that's the nature of those West End theaters. Is The craft of them is that you've got to be downstage center to do something important. And if you're upstage left or right, then you sort of disappear. And so the show was designed with the I suppose, yeah, the logistics of one of those big theaters in mind. But it was such a good fun to sort of create. And Jodie was so game. I remember ringing her up and saying, "So I'm gonna wet you. So how do you feel about that?" And she sort of looked at me, and she was on holiday somewhere, and she went, "Okay, all right, all right." And then, when the first day we turned the water on, it was freezing cold. They heated it eventually, but it was
Ouch.
probably going. But we used to rehearse, like that whole section. We used to rehearse under the rain because Suzie has this great provocation in the middle of the play, which is that a pause happens. And she'd always said to me, that's the one thing we can't change. You need a moment for the audience to have a response to what happens at the end of the first half, but I don't want it to be an interval because it'll let them off the hook.
Yeah.
And in Australia, they'd done it with the actress went off stage, changed the jacket. And there was something for me about the rain and the tears and then those numbers that in terms of the amount of people, the amount of time it takes for a case to come, that felt like it had a sort of power to it and didn't let us off the hook, but at the same time gave us a breath before we got into the second half.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting in the play because what she obviously gets soaked, and then backstage there was this amazing pit crew who are, driving her and changing her so she can get back on as fast as possible and keep going. But it did mean she was wet for the second half of the show, and I remember talking to her about that, and she was like, she's just so courageous, and she was like, yeah, bring it on. And I think it helped her in the moments of the second half of the show because there is a sort of patheticness to when you're wet and you're feeling like everything's lost.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting.
Yeah. Could imagine if she said no.
That would have been a challenge. Yeah. We all had another idea, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's such a beautiful moment. I mean, and it's a very simple show. It's the little show that could, and it's got these couple of big moments, which is the rain, and then obviously what happens at the end. But in terms of it, it's just a woman pushing around furniture, and standing on things, and it's not particularly complicated.
Yeah. That's the synopsis. Woman pushes furniture around. Come and see this show.
I know. It's funny, isn't it? And and really then the folders then really led to what that final image was. And then so Rebecca Lucy Taylor, who is such a freaking rock star.
Self-esteem, yeah.
Self-esteem, who, is a working class woman, and really understands drama and theatricality in the music that she makes.
Yeah.
I remember James, and I should say James is a huge part of this whole experience as well. James had sort of suggested her, and I met her and listened to a lot of her music, and we just went, this feels like the right energy for it. But she wrote that last piece and she brought it in, and I knew that we wanted the folders to do what they do at the end. And she just wrote that extraordinary piece of music that then sort of all came together with the final image. So it was a beautiful group of people to work with.
It was, as some critics said, it was the theatre event of that year of 2022. And I just want to say, just thank you for that show, Justin. It was just a brilliant piece. And it's something I saw that luckily enough, it was broadcast more than once, and I saw it twice. It was just a really fantastic, insightful, and I think not only because of the story and everything that's happened as a result, and now more and more people feel like you've given people that confidence to come out and tell their story about something that they otherwise, up until Prima Facie, wouldn't have been able to talk about. But also just from an acting and because being an actor myself, watching Jodie, watching her choices, thinking at one part of my brain, I'm going, how is she learning all those fucking lines? But then another part of it, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know that's just step one. And then once you get into the room, then you can start playing and exploring and everything. And just everything about it was just fantastic. So congratulations to you, sir, for that and that project. Just out of curiosity, when you work with actors, would you like them to come to like rehearsals like day one? Do you want them to have all the lines in their head? Or are you kind of like a bit lenient? It's like give them a couple of weeks if they're not fully there yet, but then obviously once you get into the middle of it, then you want them to be off book. But would you prefer them to have them off book on day one?
It's really whatever works for the actor. I mean, I like to get a run of the show early, so I'm not a great one, and like Stephen and I sort of, I got this really from Stephen, I suppose, is I'm not a great one of sitting around at the table and talking around about it for hours and hours. I like to get up on its feet and I suppose take a bite of the apple and see what we've all got. And then if we need to then sit down and talk about it more, then this scene or that scene, do it. But so I normally try and get a run as fast as I can. And so if an actor can get to that during the rehearsal process, and that's great. But if they feel they need to do it before, then that's great too. It's really up to that. It's really about what gets the folder or the script out of the way of the actor so they can just play. But it was, I think we ran the play at the end of the second week of rehearsals, and then the third week we took it apart again. Ran act one at the end of the first week. That's right. I remember saying to Jodie, we're going to do that, and she was like, "What?" It's just about getting it up and having a go at it and looking at what we had. And then I remember I redid a couple of scenes in the third week, which I hadn't cracked. We hadn't quite cracked them. And then the fourth week was just running it. So I mean, you learn so much from running it and doing it and then talking about it and then running and doing it. And you really get them into you get to a stage where you're really confident. But there are other directors who go, don't run it until the night before you go into tech. And that's not how I work. I feel like I want everyone to be much more comfortable than that.
Yeah, you want everyone to have a sense of what happens at each point in the journey, like before, like early on. So then when it gets to the later stages, then they can just go into it like fluidly and see okay, so where do you need to be in Act 3? Well, I'm there. So okay, where you're in Act 4, I'm over there, sort of thing. So everyone's like got an awareness of where they are at any one point in the show, right?
Yeah, but also means you can. Yes, I think that's right. It also means you can rewrite. Like, so, Stranger Things, we were rewriting all the time during previews, like whole scenes and whole sections, and Prima Facie, we did a little bit of rewriting, but not. I mean, most of the rewriting was towards shifting the show towards Jodie and building it on Jodie, so that it felt, it was set. She was from Liverpool and all that sort of stuff, but it's just giving the space for all of us to feel confident, and then we can change things.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. I know we're slightly pushed for time today because I know you've got to do other things in a second. I've just got a few more questions for you, Justin.
Go for it.
So one thing I was thinking about, you mentioned there about sometimes you get stuck, like some scenes or things can get a bit more of a challenge than others. Sometimes you might have to rewrite or reblock or whatever it is that you do. But what's the best way of approaching scenes which at first you're not too sure of or find it tricky at first? What's the best way of cracking them, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it's always when I approach a scene, I normally am trying to find the idea or what's the I call it the idea, but it's like, what's the play within the scene? And if I can find that, then I know how to stage it. If I can't, then it gets a bit tricky. And then I'll have a go. I'll have a go, but you feel it failing as you're doing it. But it's just a lot of talk with the writer. I mean, I'm very writer driven in terms of the way that I work, trying to understand what they're trying to do, and then how can I support that, or what seems to be of interest within the context of a scene, like I suppose where the point of focus, where the idea is within it. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. You do get stuck in places. I suppose the thing is not. Sometimes you have to push through that stuck, and sometimes you just have to leave it and come back to it.
Yeah, just go have a cup of tea and just let your brain sort of like break it apart, if that makes sense. Then you come back like, what do we do this way? There we go. Then you find the way through. So just a couple more things for you, mate. So this is a new question I've sort of adopted the last few episodes towards the end, which is, what would you say was a piece of advice that you wish you'd heard at the beginning of your journey?
There's so many. But I think there's something that happens as you get older. People start trusting that you know what you're talking about. Like, it's just something you exude like you've got knowledge, which is absolute crap. I mean, you know less when you get older. But I think that the courage, I mean, people say this is a bit of a stereotype, but the courage to say I don't know, and to be okay to sit in that and know that collectively we will find a way forward. Because once you feel you've got the courage to, if I could encourage myself to be more courageous in that, and then to know that the people around me will help me and they won't judge me for not knowing. But actually taking people on a journey together is a much more interesting way within the context of building something. So I'd probably say that to myself. Yeah. And the other big thing as a director, we spend most of our lives pitching, and they do not teach it to us. And we need to, like, pitching is our thing. We're doing it all the time. I've got an idea whether I'm pitching an idea to an actor in a room, or I'm pitching an idea of a play to an artistic director, or to a producer, or, you know, to a writer. We're all pitching, and you need to be really good at that and get better at that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that, but time will permit me from doing that. Just before the last question, thank you again for your time today, Justin. I really appreciate it. Let's do this again. I'd love to have you back on. I've still got so many more questions I'd like to ask you about Prima Facie, and of course, just the rehearsal room in general, the various elements that go into it, and casting, and what you were just talking about there as well. So, but we'll have to get a part 2 in as well to talk more about that. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So just one final question for you, which is for every guest. What's been an experience or experiences you've had in your career up to this point that you're never, ever going to forget?
I suppose there's 2. I remember the first time I put a Billy on. So I joined Billy about 6 months before it was going to Australia. So I learnt the show in England, and then I took it to Oz. And the first Billy I put up, and realized it, because it took on my own, with a team, and watching the power of that show and that kid in that show, I'll never forget, because, you know, those kids were extraordinary, but you were basically teaching them to act, sing, dance within such a short amount of time, and with some skills, but you always had to sort of upskill. And so I'll never forget that day. And then the other one was the first preview of Prima Facie, where actually Stephen was at that preview. I said, come and see the show and give me notes. And I put him in the middle of the stalls, and he was surrounded by men and women, but predominantly women, who at the beginning of the last cue, they already knew what was happening, and they rose to their feet with this roar that I've never heard in theatre before. And you just went, that energy is what could change the world. And it was so exciting and moving, and I just sat there and cried. And I ran backstage, and, you know, they were all crying backstage. It was one of those just things where you're going, the power of the play and the power of the combination of what we'd put together was something I'd never experienced. And I saw Stephen after it, and he said, I've got no notes for you. It's going to be a hit. Wow. And I was like, it was just one of those nights I'll never forget.
Fantastic. Right. There you have it. Fantastic. Justin, thank you so much for your time today, man. Like I said, I'd love to have you back. Let's do this again. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, mate. Cool. If you just hang on, I'll finish the recording. I'll say goodbye to you one-to-one in a second. But guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This has been the Uncensored Critic podcast, and I'll be back very, very soon. And once again, Justin, Martin, thank you so much.